Welcome to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate Show. Whether you are an active or passive investor, we'll teach you how to scale your real estate investing business into something big.
Dave, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. This is great. I love bringing new guests on that have not had their particular niche yet. Obviously, I think anyone who's listening to the show, you probably already know what a 1031 is. I think we conceptually understand that. But I don't think that all of us know all the nuts and bolts of a 1031. So excited to have Dave on here today. Dave, can you just give us a high level overview of the 1031? And then maybe we'll spend a little time getting into some of the finer details.
Well, yeah, absolutely. As we used to say way back in the beginning, 20 years or so ago, when someone asked that question, I can do that, Sam, but then I'll have to kill you. It really did start out, although 1031s have been part of the code for 100 years. It's been ingrained in the tax code. Only in the last 25 or so has it, through court cases, become usable for the investor on the street.
Right.
That's why people know the number, but they don't know how it works.
Sure.
But in essence, what a 1031 exchange allows you to do is to sell real estate, investment real estate, that you either have a lot of gain in or that you've depreciated out over a number of years. Sell that and buy new real estate to be used for investment. And in the middle, you do not have to pay tax on the gain or depreciation recapture. That gets deferred into the new property indefinitely. So in essence, you're going to be allowed to use the government's dollars for your investment purposes. That's the essence of the 1031.
That's pretty amazing. What are some of the common pitfalls in doing this?
Yeah, well, it's a very specific process, and it requires the use of a qualified intermediary. So that's someone like us. And all we're allowed to do is to process the 1031 exchanges. So as you can imagine, we're a little harder to find because your accountant can't do your 1031s. Your lawyer can't do your 1031s. But that's probably the single biggest issue, is that someone has to locate a QI and get involved with them prior to their sale. I get calls every month. Dave, I sold a property last week. I'm ready to do a 1031. No, you're not. That ship sailed. We've got to be involved prior to.
Like, how disappointing for not only for you guys, but also for the investor. I mean, you can't make money on somebody that wants to do it.
Well, and if I'm in a grumpy mood, I'll take them through an exercise of, guys, do you realize how much tax you're going to have to pay? Which is really cruel. But,
that's mean, man.
It's true, though, because the power of that deferred tax for simply going through an administrative process is crazy.
Right.
You as the investor don't do anything different. You get a property ready to sell, you list it, you sell it. You go and find your replacement property. Now, there's some timing issues because you only have 45 days to find your new property and a total of 180 to close. So that's probably pitfall number 2, is that it's a constrained time frame. But that's all you do in addition to using the QI, and you defer all this tax. Right. Now, we'll do an Excel spreadsheet scenario with folks that takes 2 investors, one who does 1031 exchanges and one who simply pays the tax. Within 5 transactions that are identical, at the end of 20 years, the investor that does the 1031 exchanges is controlling $12 million in real estate. The investor who paid the tax is controlling 5. Wow. Now, that's not too shabby, but simply for the sake of an administrative process, you're able to buy $7 million more in real estate. It was Albert Einstein, by the way, that called that compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was the 8th wonder of the world. Those who know it and understand it will benefit. Those who don't are going to pay for it.
Right. Absolutely. Let's rewind a little bit. You said 45 to find, 180 to close.
Correct.
On that 45 to find. So I say you've identified the property. What constitutes identifying it?
That's got to be something that's in writing. We provide most QIs do, a form for you to fill out, because we're going to be responsible for making sure you've got it in and that it's time stamped within 45 days, because that is a very, very rigid time frame. At midnight on day 45, you can no longer change that list, and you can only close on one of the properties on that list. That 45 days is pretty critical.
So you could have multiple potential acquisitions in that list. It doesn't have to be a single property.
Absolutely.
Oh, that changes things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So why not just get a database of every single property in the country and stick it on the list, and then that gives you time to shop for the 180. You're not stressing.
Funny you should mention that. You may remember what phone books were.
I do.
Right.
I do.
So in the early days of this,
the last one I threw out was in 2007, I think. I'm like, what is this doing on my doorstep? And that's the last one I got.
In 1996, investors in Los Angeles brought in the LA County phone book, threw it on the QI's desk and said, this is my 45-day list. The IRS did not like that, as you can imagine.
Sure.
So there's some restrictions.
Okay.
Most people will end up naming 3 to 5 properties on their list because of the constraints, which we really don't have time to get into.
Sure.
But I've got some videos on my website that explain it a little bit further. But yeah, the 45 is serious, because after day 45, you're going to have to close on one of those properties.
What happened? Or is there an alternative to just say, bag it? I'm not doing the 1031. Give me my money. I'll pay the tax.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's no penalty for starting but not completing at 1031.
Okay.
Other than you end up paying the tax.
We'll pay the tax and you. So besides those two things, right? Okay. So 45 to find can be multiple properties. I just learned that. That's a new thing I've learned today.
Right.
So thank you for that. And then you have from the other transactions close, you have 180 in total days. So after 45 is up, you then have 135 more days, to get that across the finish line.
That's exactly right. And that ability to purchase multiple properties also goes the opposite direction. And that fits into what we see real estate investors do as they kind of go through their life cycle. Like the lowly caterpillar that goes into the chrysalis and comes out a moth. Real estate investors many times will buy a single family rental property. Or what's even more common, Sam, is that 2 people will get married. And because we get married later in life, he has a house, she has a house. They get married, they decide to move into one of them. Riddle me this, Batman. Which house do they always move into?
Hers.
Because it's the only one that's clean. That's exactly right.
So, that's a fact.
And what did they become then? They became accidental landlords.
Right.
They have an investment property. A year or 2 go down the road, they decide to sell that because they like the income. And that's when they start to do what we call diversify. Sell one property, buy 2. Use the proceeds as down payments. Sell 2, buy 4, sell 4, buy whatever. And then one day, Sam, you wake up and you're tired and you don't know why, till you realize you're on your 3rd plumber's call of the day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then you start to do what's the exact opposite. You start to consolidate, sell 4 or 5 $100,000 properties, use them to buy one commercial property that meets the investment requirements. So you take most of the workload out. If you're moving from single family or residential into commercial, maybe you're going into a triple net scenario where the tenant is paying the taxes, maintenance, and insurance. So you're able to lessen your workload and turn a very active career into a more passive career. And that, I think, is one of the key strengths of the 1031. In addition to just deferring the tax, it's the ability to shape your portfolio into any type of investment real estate, anywhere in the United States of any number as you go through your life.
Right. No, I love that. I'm curious. I hadn't thought either about multiple properties 1031ing into the same exchange so let's call it from 5 to 1, just for an example. Maybe maybe you use that example already, but 5 properties down to 1. Can you take one property and 1031 that into 2?
Absolutely. So let's say you had a $100,000 property that you owned for, well, let's say it's a $300,000 property and you own it for cash. Reinvestment requirements say that if you want to defer tax all the way, you've got to purchase at least as much as you sell.
Right.
So you're selling for $300,000 with $300,000 in cash. You could go buy another $300,000 property, but you could also go buy a $200,000 property for cash and use the other $100,000 as a down payment on maybe a $500,000 quadplex. As long as you're purchasing at least as much as you sell, the actual number of properties doesn't matter. And when you do something like I just described, it's what I call defensive investing, because you still own a property for cash that's out of harm's way. All you've got to do is basically be able to keep the lights on,
right,
and adjust rents. No, you don't have the stress and the worry of leverage, but you're still getting the bounce on your return on investment, because on the other property, you're leveraging it as high as you can.
Right.
So you get the best of both worlds, an element of safety, higher returns, more properties and more doors.
What can you tell me when it comes to debt? How does debt play into this?
It doesn't directly. It's a very interesting phenomenon, because the 2-part requirement is purchase at least as much as you sell, use all of the proceeds from the sale in the next purchase. So let's say on that $300,000 property, you've got $200,000 in debt. That means you're going to generate $100,000 in cash, and you need to use that $100,000 to buy $300,000 in real estate. So technically speaking, though, that does not have to be debt. You could replace that with your own money, or you could just buy for $250 and pay tax on the difference. That's what we would call a partial exchange. Now, most people, when they have leverage, though, don't have access to other proceeds to replace that. So they end up taking out a new loan, but technically they don't have to.
Right.
The money can come from anywhere, as long as they purchase at least as much as they sold.
Right.
And as long as they use all of the cash that was generated.
Right. And you made an interesting point there. You could do a partial 1031. So I'm just reiterating this to make sure I understand. You could take, and again, your $300,000 in cash scenario, you might use $250 of it and pay tax on $50 of it.
That's exactly right.
Interesting.
Well, sometimes you just need to spend some money.
Right.
And that's the way that you can take it out, but you still shelter everything else. See, the mantra in the 1031 industry is what we call the 4 Ds. Defer. Are you ready to write this down?
I'm on it, man.
Defer, defer, defer.
I'm going to guess
die.
Defer. Oh, die. Oh, I see. I got it wrong. You led me astray.
I told you to write it down. Because as long as you own the property you 1031 into, you will never pay the tax.
Sure.
As long as any time you sell that property, you do another 1031, you'll never pay the tax. And when you die at this point in the political landscape, your heirs get what is called a step up in basis, which means when you die, they get the property as if they paid market value for it. And the tax at that point goes away. And it truly becomes tax-free to your heirs. So I caution people about telling their children about this too quickly, because that can lead to temptation. But it also is a great goal to have in mind, to create this tax-free legacy for your children by keeping tax deferred and using it for yourself all the way through your career.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's assuming obviously that whatever gains you are making on this real estate, you don't need to take as income or take any of the proceeds off the top. So, I mean, or like you said, you could do a partial. So that's
You
interesting.
could do a partial, or can I give you another huge tip?
Please.
People will love this one. Instead of taking money out and doing a partial exchange, instead of paying yourself a salary, which would be taxed, do the 1031 exchange, purchase the new property, and then afterwards refinance it. And when you refinance it, refinances are tax-free. So you get the cash tax-free to use for whatever you wanted, but you also are still fully deferring all of the gain from the sale. And the best of all, do you know who's paying that loan payment? The tenant.
The tenant, sure. But that assumes one thing, and that is that we bought it for a lot less than it's worth. You can't refinance something if there's no equity in it to necessarily refinance.
Well, right. But remember that $300,000 property?
Yes.
Where there was, $100,000 or $200,000 in loan? There was still some margin on that. And what a lot of people will do is they will buy, say, maybe something that's a value add, which is a great opportunity.
Sure.
We see this with multifamilies a ton, or rundown industrial commercial, where they will buy it at, you say, a very discounted value. It's worth what it's worth, but it needs a huge value add component. And then they will value add, reappraise, refinance, pull out the repair component, and at the same time put a little, as we would say, a little something for themselves. Right. And it's all tax-free.
Right. No, that's brilliant. That's a great, that's a great strategy I wouldn't have thought about. Yeah. Especially in the scenario of value add. I think that really makes a lot of sense there. That's awesome. Okay, man, this is awesome. What would you say? So we talked a little bit about common mistakes. The first one you said was that people tend to call you after the fact, which that's obviously a big no-no, and you can't do anything with that. What's something else you see people doing that you wish that they would talk to you about ahead of time?
Entity. And that's really actually the last one of the requirements we haven't talked about. It's amazing we got through all of them. But the same taxpayer for the old property has to be the taxpayer for the new property. And what that means is that typically the owner who is on deed is the taxpayer. What it really means is what tax return is reporting the activity of that property. The property may be in the name of an LLC, deeded, but it could be an LLC that is taxed as a sole proprietor, which means it really shows up on my tax return.
Right.
So in that event, I'm really the taxpayer.
Right.
So I could sell as the LLC and I could buy as myself. So that kind of stuff is cool. Where it gets into problems is where people get together with partners and they form an LLC or a partnership or something. And then they want to separate at the end. But we have difficulty unraveling it because it's now in a new taxpayer.
Right.
That LLC files a tax return. It can do a 1031 exchange, but not the individual members.
Right.
So then we have to do some things to help unravel that. But I would say that's probably another pitfall is the entity. Yeah, I think those are, I can't believe we got through all six in a sort of passing fashion. That's amazing.
No, we're doing great. We're rocking and rolling here. So I want to clarify that. And this, I'm going to bring a real world example into this, which is something I had last year. And we did not, we kicked around the idea. So just to clarify, it was a fund to fund situation. So it was, we were an LLC that was invested into a limited partnership, or the LLC was invested into another LLC. And our group, when we sold, we said, hey, look, we might want to just take all the proceeds inside of this LLC, redraft some of our documents because everybody was on board with doing this, and then take everything we made in that project and put it into another one. Of course, there was, 5, 6, 7 of us in the deal, but we could do that, right? Because the LLC was moving and it was going to be all the same taxpayers from
possibly. And that's where it gets interesting. The large property, what kind of property was it that the LP was buying?
It's a parking lot.
Okay. So did the LP buy the parking lot? And you invested in the LP,
Correct.
your LLC.
Yep.
What did your LLC own?
We owned 4/10 of that asset or
Okay.
of the limited partnership.
Right. So here's the problem. You did not own real estate.
We owned a share of a company.
Exactly. And to 1031, it has to be real estate. Now, if your LLC and the LP would have gone together as tenants in common,
Right.
each one of you would have owned a piece of real estate.
Right. Which we were
And when
not.
it was sold, your LLC could do a 1031 exchange. Their LP could do a 1031 exchange because each one of you owned real estate. In your scenario, the LP could do the 1031 because it owned the real estate.
Right.
Your LLC just had to go along with them.
Right. So we would have had to take all the proceeds of that limited partnership, or that limited partnership would have to move everybody from one to the next. Is that right?
Exactly.
That's interesting. Sorry for the listeners going in on a detailed, nuanced question, but I just
That was actually a great question, though.
Yeah, it was
Good
one
example.
it was one that we were kicking around and we never got the solution to. So tell us this: what's a timing? And I know we're running over time here, which has happened to me more and more lately. But tell us about the timing. Like, when should someone contact you? Obviously, before they get to this process, how many weeks out should they contact you before they want to roll funds over?
The actual process of setting up a 1031 exchange is not that onerous. It doesn't take much time at all. So we usually tell people, best time to get a hold of us as soon as you go under contract for your sale and you're in escrow.
Right.
Because then we can work with the attorneys and the closing entities doing that. So that's the best time simply for the process. Logistically, strategically, especially as you go bigger and bigger and you're moving into slower moving commercial type transactions, you need to be talking to me a year, 18 months before.
Okay.
So that we can help you create that entity stream, so we can help you. And that also gives us the bandwidth and the runway to be able to do something like a reverse exchange for you if needed, which we haven't even talked about. But basically, reverse exchange allows you to control your new property before your old property closes. And we do those quite often on larger assets because the fear of not being able to get your old property sold in time or not being able to find a suitable replacement because the market is so hot that a reverse exchange can work really well. But those take a few months to get put together right.
Got it. That's interesting. Let's jump into the final four. If you were to give one piece of advice to someone as it pertains to 1031s, what's that one piece of advice?
Be patient. Don't, and people say this, but they still think they have to. What's going to kill you is not the deal that you miss out on. Nobody ever went bankrupt missing out on a deal. What's going to kill you is the deal you get that you shouldn't have. So don't be scared to let a 1031 die. Pay a little tax because that's tax on profit. Start over the next day and do it again. So patience. Don't be scared to let it die if you can't find a good replacement.
Yep. I can imagine you've seen plenty of that. What is one thing you're currently doing to stay on top of your game?
I am using more and more. I'm a independent kind of cuss. But more and more, I'm finding joy in mentors and coaches, whether that's for physical education or a coach teaching me how to play the guitar or a business coach helping me identify deals. I've been in this a long time, and the joy of seeing the process through someone else's eyes who's understanding me is huge.
That's awesome. I love that. When it comes to giving back, what's one thing you're doing to make the world a better place?
We love working with the homeless. Here in St. Petersburg, there's a number of different shelters and organizations that will do breakfast. Can you imagine what has happened in the last 12 months with the COVID? Those kind of things have really become crippled. So we're trying to do our part to help to fund some of the other homeless efforts so they can ramp up their feeding, and try not to be scared to go on the front line. COVID is COVID. Fear is fear, and I get it, and I am fearful, but the people that live next door to you, the people that live down the street from you, we all need human interaction. And if I could encourage anybody, it's like, go say hi. Do it from 6 feet away if you need to, but go say hi.
Right. I love that, man. That's a good word. That's a good word. Dave, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, how do we do that?
We have set up an entire education portal that has like 30 videos, everything you'd ever need to learn about 1031 exchanges or to get a good night's sleep if you just start late in the night. It's www.the1031investor.com.
Dave, thanks for your time. Certainly appreciate it.